Hello, and welcome to Soulspeak. Tonight's story begins on what seemed like an ordinary afternoon in Bayridge, California, a small coastal town where children once raced scooters down sunlit streets, and mothers waved from porches without fear. But on November 14, 1991, innocence vanished in less than a minute. A 9-year-old girl left her silver scooter by the door of a corner store and never came back out. No witnesses saw her scream. No one heard a struggle. Only a single pink ribbon tangled in the dust, and the sound of the wind through the empty parking lot. For 30 years, her name became a whisper, a ghost woven into the town's quiet nights, until one small piece of evidence, forgotten in an old police box, finally spoke again. This is The Last Scooter Ride, a story about how darkness can hide in daylight, how a mother's hope can outlive decades of silence, and how the past never truly stays buried. November 14, 1991. The sky above Bayridge, California was the pale blue of glass left too long in the sun. A salt wind drifted in from the Pacific, carrying the faint cries of gulls and the smell of gasoline from the fishing docks below the cliffs. The town moved at its usual unhurried rhythm. The hardware store's bell clanged open and shut. A dog barked somewhere behind the post office, and the laughter of two girls echoed faintly along Maple Street. Lila Morgan, age 9, was easy to spot even from a distance. Her pink jacket flared as she rode her silver scooter, the wheels clattering against the sidewalk cracks. Her best friend, June Carter, followed close behind, her sneakers squeaking as they swerved around a trash can. The girls were headed toward Miller's Corner Store, a narrow little shop squeezed between a laundromat and a barber's, the kind of place where everyone knew your name and your favorite soda. "Last one there has to pay," Lila shouted, her voice light with mischief. June laughed and pushed harder with her foot. The sound of their scooters blended with the hum of the late afternoon traffic, a small, ordinary symphony that no one thought to remember. They reached the store. Just after 4:30 p.m. the air had turned cooler. The sunlight slanted through the storefront windows in long amber stripes. June hopped off her scooter and ran inside, calling out a greeting to Mr. Miller behind the counter. Lila lingered outside. She adjusted the strap of her backpack and propped her scooter against the wall beside the newspaper rack. Her reflection shimmered faintly in the glass door, a blur of pink and sunlight, before she turned toward the street. That was the last clear image anyone ever had of her alive. June spent less than a minute. Inside, she dropped a handful of coins on the counter, grabbed 2 cherry colas, and turned toward the door, laughing about something she couldn't later recall. When she stepped outside, the sidewalk was empty. The space where Lila had stood, the spot of sunlight by the door, was vacant, the silver scooter lying on its side, one wheel still spinning, slow and soundless. "Lila," June called, her voice small against the rustle of wind. She checked around the corner behind the trash bins, even across the street. No answer. The bottle slipped from her hand, shattered against the pavement, and rolled into the gutter. At 4:46 p.m., the first 911 call was made. By 5:10, the corner was crowded, police cars, flashing lights, neighbors pressing in with questions and fear. Someone mentioned a blue van, old and rusted, parked near the curb minutes before the girl vanished. Someone else thought they'd seen a man in a red flannel jacket standing by the payphone, but no one could describe his face. The air was filled with noise, radios, shouting, the static hiss of panic, yet the moment of disappearance itself remained eerily silent, like the town had blinked and a child had been erased. When Evelyn Morgan arrived, still in her nurse's uniform from the hospital, she had to push past the yellow tape. Her voice broke as she called her daughter's name, again and again, until it dissolved into sobs. Officers tried to steady her, but she fell to her knees beside the silver scooter. A pink ribbon clung to the handlebar, tangled with dust and a few strands of Lila's hair. The street lamps flickered on as the sun disappeared behind the cliffs. The search spread through the park, the playground, the alley behind the store. Volunteers carried flashlights and called into the darkness, "Lila, Lila honey, where are you?" Dogs barked, their leashes tight. Somewhere in the distance, the tide crashed against the rocks, slow and indifferent. By midnight, there was nothing to find. No footprints beyond the curb, no tire marks distinct enough to trace, just the scooter, bagged as evidence, and the echo of a child's voice carried by the wind. Detective Claire Monroe, then only 27 and new to the Bayridge Police Department, stood by the store's entrance long after the others left. She studied the marks on the sidewalk, the faint drag of rubber where the scooter had fallen, and the circle of crushed gravel near the curb. It was as if someone had reached out from the street and plucked the girl into thin air behind her. The store's neon sign buzzed weakly, open 24 hours. Inside, the soda bottles gleamed in their coolers, untouched. The next morning, newspapers carried the story. Missing, Leila Morgan, age 9, last seen 4:35 p.m., Maple Street. Her school photo, bright-eyed, missing a front tooth, stared out from every telephone pole and diner window in Bayridge. Volunteers combed through the coastal woods and the abandoned quarry north of town. Helicopters circled the shoreline. The police divers searched the bay, though no one truly believed she had gone there on her own. Days passed, then weeks, then months. The tips dried up. The phone stopped ringing. The blue van became a ghost story whispered among children. Don't talk to strangers or the van will come for you. In February, 4 months after the disappearance, the official search was scaled back. Evelyn Morgan refused to stop. She left her porch light on every night and kept Leila's room exactly as it was, the bed neatly made, the window cracked open, the silver scooter propped in the corner after it was returned from evidence. Just in case she comes home, she said. She need to see the light. The town moved on, at least on the surface. Bayridge's boardwalk reopened for the summer crowds. Kids rode their bikes again, but there were changes you could feel, if not see. Parents walked closer to their children. The sound of a van engine made people turn their heads. Sometimes, on late autumn evenings, when the fog rolled in from the ocean, the air would carry a faint metallic squeak, the kind made by an old scooter wheel turning in the wind. People said it was just the sign by Miller's store. Others weren't so sure. Detective Monroe kept the case file on her desk for years. She transferred departments twice, but never left Bayridge. Every so often, she would open the worn folder, the photographs, the statements, the ribbons sealed in plastic. Each time, she told herself there was nothing new to learn, yet she always looked again, tracing the handwriting on the evidence tag like a ritual she couldn't abandon. The town aged around the memory of the girl who never came home. Evelyn grew older, her hair turning white, her voice quiet. She stopped granting interviews but never moved away. She said she could still hear her daughter's laughter in the morning when the waves hit the rocks just right, and still, in the archives of the Bayridge Police Department, the label remained, Case 911124 Morgan, LILA open, for 30 years. It stayed that way, a single unanswered question sealed beneath layers of dust and silence, until one day, decades later, a small plastic evidence bag was reopened, and the faintest trace of blood, invisible to 1991 science, began to speak. But that would come later. For now, the town of Bayridge slept uneasy, beneath the weight of its own forgetting, and somewhere beyond the cliffs, the sea kept its secrets. 30 years can change everything. The skyline, the names on shop signs, the faces of the people who once knew each other by heart. But in Bayridge, California, some things never changed. The salt wind still carried the same smell of rust and ocean. The gulls still circled the docks, their cries thin and distant, and on quiet mornings, when the mist rolled through the streets, people swore they could still hear a child's laughter echoing faintly down Maple Street, a sound that didn't belong to anyone living. It was the spring of 2021 when Detective Claire Monroe returned to the case. She was 52 now, her once dark hair streaked with gray, her eyes sharp but tired in a way that came from years of chasing truths that refused to be caught. Her office sat in the renovated Bayridge Police Department, a building that smelled faintly of disinfectant and old paper. On the wall behind her desk hung a bulletin board filled with cold cases, names written in fading ink, faces frozen in time. Leila Morgan's was still pinned at the top. Claire hadn't meant to reopen it. It started as a routine archive review, a digital conversion of old evidence for the department's modernization project. Boxes from the early 90s were being catalogued, scanned, and uploaded to the state database. She'd seen hundreds of them pass across her desk, but when the technician handed her a small envelope marked Case 911124, her chest tightened. Inside was the silver scooter handle, wrapped carefully in plastic. The tag, still yellowed with age, read, recovered at scene, possible fingerprints and blood trace. Back in 1991, the lab reports had come back inconclusive. The technology then couldn't separate mixed DNA or read partial samples. The faint brown smear on the rubber grip had been logged, sealed, and forgotten. But in 2021, science had caught up. The state had just adopted a new forensic method, advanced touch DNA, and probabilistic genotyping, capable of isolating individual contributors from decades-old samples. For most cases, it meant updating reports. For others, it meant ghosts might finally speak. Claire hesitated before authorizing the submission. She had seen this before, the false hope that rises and crashes when technology promises closure but delivers more questions. Still, she filled out the form and sent it to the California Forensic Science Bureau in Sacramento. Weeks passed. Then, one morning in June, an email arrived with the subject line, DNA MATCH confidential. The result came with a single name, Raymond Holt. Claire stared at the screen. The name was familiar, though she couldn't immediately place it. She typed it into the system and froze. Incarcerated Folsom State Prison, convicted 1998. 2 counts of first-degree murder. The victims were women both in their 20s, abducted, assaulted, and killed within a 50-mile radius of Bayridge between 1993 and 1994. The details were sickeningly precise. Holt had confessed to those murders but denied involvement in any others. His sentence, life without parole. For 30 years, Lila Morgan had been a mystery without a face. Now she had one, and it belonged to a man, already locked away. Claire printed the report, the paper warm in her hand, and walked down the corridor to the evidence room. The smell of dust and cardboard filled the air. She found the old casebox again and laid the report on top of it like a gravestone. Outside, rain began to fall, steady, deliberate, tapping against the glass. That evening, she reopened the original case file. Photographs in black and white. The store, the scooter, the ribbon, the small handprints on the window of Miller's corner store. Evelyn Morgan's statement, written in a shaky hand the night her daughter disappeared. She was wearing her pink jacket. She said she'd be right back. 30 years of silence pressed down on the page. Claire closed her eyes, remembering that night, the way the wind had cut through her uniform, the sound of Evelyn's sobs carrying over the sirens, the way the silver scooter had gleamed under the streetlight. For a long time, she had told herself that some cases simply didn't have endings, that sometimes evil walks past us and vanishes into the fog. But now she could feel it again, that sharp, restless pull of unfinished work. The next morning, she called the warden at Folsom Prison, Detective Monroe, Bayridge Police Department. She said, "I'd like to request an interview with inmate Raymond Holt, regarding an unsolved disappearance from 1991. There was a pause on the line, the faint hum of static. "Holt doesn't talk to cops," the warden replied. "Hasn't in over a decade." "He'll talk to me," Claire said quietly. "He just doesn't know it yet." 2 weeks later, she drove north along Interstate 5. The landscape outside her window shifted from dry farmland to concrete walls crowned with barbed wire. Folsom Prison loomed ahead, a fortress of gray stone, its towers rising against a washed-out sky. Inside, the air was heavy with disinfectant and the quiet rhythm of boots on linoleum. The visiting room was smaller than she remembered from her early years on the force. Plexiglass divided her from the man sitting opposite her. Raymond Holt looked older than his file photos, 61 now, with a shaved head, pale eyes, and the kind of stillness that made people nervous. His hands were folded neatly on the table, scarred, veins like rope. Claire studied him for a moment before speaking. "Mr. Holt, I'm here about a girl named Lila Morgan, disappeared from Bayridge in 1991. You would have been 31 at the time." He tilted his head slightly, as if weighing the name in his mind. "That was a long time ago," he said. His voice was calm, almost polite. "Not for her mother," Claire replied. A faint smile flickered across his face. "They always send the ones who still believe in ghosts," he murmured. Claire slid a photograph across the counter, the silver scooter, the ribbon, the curb where the tire marks ended. "Your DNA was found on this handle. It's conclusive. There's no mistake." Holt's eyes drifted down to the image. For a moment, something flickered there, recognition, maybe, or memory. Then he leaned back in his chair. "You think that little scrap of science tells you a story," he said softly. "It doesn't. It only tells you where I've been, not what I did." "Then tell me," she said. But silence stretched. Finally, he looked up, his expression unreadable. "She wanted to go home," he said. "I showed her a shortcut." Claire's stomach turned. "Well, it's been 30 years, he whispered, smiling faintly. "Do you think the earth still remembers where she fell?" He stood when the guards motioned for him to leave, the chains clinking softly. As he passed the door, he paused, glancing back. "You'll find her," he said, "but it won't change anything." That night, back in Bayridge, Claire sat in her car outside the police station. The rain had stopped, but the streets were slick and empty, reflecting the glow of the street. She could feel the old case breathing again, stirring beneath the years of dust. She called the forensic unit. "Expand the search area," she said. 15 miles north of Bayridge. Look for quarry sites, construction dumps, Anywhere he might have had access to in the early 90s. Why there? The technician asked. Claire stared through the windshield, watching the fog rise from the sea. Because Holt worked on the docks, she said, and the dirt on that scooter grip wasn't from the street. It was limestone. The town had changed, but the cliffs hadn't, and somewhere beneath those cliffs, hidden under 30 years of silence, the truth was waiting, cold, buried, and patient. Folsom Prison looked different in the daylight. The grey walls gleamed wet from morning rain, and the razor wire shimmered like threads of silver under a weak sun. Inside, everything smelled faintly of metal and bleach sharp, sterile and timeless. Detective Claire Monroe walked down the narrow corridor, her footsteps echoing in rhythm with the hum of fluorescent lights overhead. The guard at the checkpoint scanned her ID, then led her toward the interview wing. It wasn't her first time here, but this visit felt heavier, as if the air itself carried the weight of the truth she'd spent half her life chasing. When she entered the room, Raymond Holt was already waiting. He sat perfectly still, his hands folded neatly on the metal table. The orange of his prison uniform looked faded, almost gray. His eyes, however, were bright, too bright, the kind of clarity that came from years of solitude and obsession. Claire took the chair opposite him. The door closed behind her with a soft, final click. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The silence stretched until it felt like another presence in the room, something cold and patient. Listening. Finally, Holt smiled. Back again, he said. His voice was calm, almost conversational. I was wondering when you'd return. Claire didn't respond right away. She placed a thin folder on the table between them. Inside were photographs, the scooter handle, the park, the store. She slid one toward him. You said something last time, she began quietly, that she wanted to go home, that you showed her a shortcut. What did you mean? Holt's eyes drifted toward the photo. His fingers didn't move, but his smile deepened slightly. You ever notice, he said, how kids trust the world completely? They think every adult is a map back to safety. He looked up at her. Lila trusted me. She just wanted to get home before dark. Claire felt the air in her chest tighten. You knew her name before I said it. Holt shrugged. It's been on the news. I've seen enough missing posters in my life to remember faces, but hers stayed. He leaned forward, his gaze steady. You want to know where it happened, don't you? Claire's throat felt dry. Yes, near the cliffs, he said simply. She liked the sound of the sea. I told her there was a path that went straight to the beach. A quiet way, no traffic. His tone was flat, almost tender. She laughed the whole time. He continued. Said her mum would be mad if she was late. Then she tripped. Just tripped. Claire's hands clenched beneath the table. You expect me to believe that? Holt tilted his head. Believe what you want. Accidents are still accidents, even when the wrong person witnesses them. He smiled faintly, and for the first time, his eyes flickered with something that looked like pride. You know what the hardest part was? Carrying her. She was so small, so light, like she'd already started to fade. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Claire stared at him, searching for any sign of remorse. There was none, only calm. We never released details about the cliffs, she said quietly, or the direction she was walking. How do you know that? Holt's smile didn't waver. Because I was there, he said simply, and because you've been chasing my shadow since you were 27, I can see it in your eyes the way you need this to mean something. He leaned back, his chains rattling softly. But it doesn't mean anything, not to me. The guard stepped forward as Claire rose from her seat. Holt's voice followed her to the door, low, measured, and cruelly calm. You'll find her soon, he said. When the rain stops, go where the wind smells like salt and iron. She's been waiting for you. That evening the rain returned to Bayridge, thin, persistent, whispering against the police station windows. Claire sat in the evidence room, surrounded by boxers older than some of the officers on the force. The fluorescent light hummed overhead, pale and relentless. She had listened to enough killers in her career to know when they were lying and when they were telling the truth to hurt you. Holt's words had felt like both. She turned to the old cardboard box labeled Morgan, Lila 1991. The tape was brittle. The ink had begun to fade. Inside were the same items she'd examined countless times, the photographs, the police sketches, the small evidence bag containing the pink ribbon. But beneath the files, tucked between two folders, something caught her eye. A thin blue notebook, edges curled and fragile with age. She pulled it out carefully. A sticker on the cover read property of Lila M. in uneven handwriting. Claire flipped it open. The first few pages were filled with drawings, crooked hearts, flowers, the ocean, a girl on a scooter drawn with shaky lines. Then came short sentences. written in the simple rhythm of a child's mind. Mom says the sea is too cold to swim in. June and I are saving for matching scooters. I want to see the dolphins one day. The handwriting grew smaller toward the end, the pencil lighter. On the final page, the words stopped halfway through a sentence. If it's sunny tomorrow, I'll ride my scooter to the beach, and the pencil mark trailed off into a faint gray smear. Claire sat back, the notebook trembling in her hands. It wasn't listed in the original inventory, somehow misplaced or overlooked decades ago when Evelyn had handed over her daughter's things. She imagined the little girl writing that line, full of ordinary hope, never knowing it would be the last thing she'd ever put on paper. In the silence, the notebook seemed to hum with memory, the small, innocent heartbeat of a life interrupted. She closed it gently and looked toward the evidence shelves. Rows upon rows of forgotten stories. Some had endings, most didn't. But this one was whispering to her. The next morning, Claire drove to the cliffs. The ocean spread wide and gray beneath the fog, the horizon blurring into nothing. She parked near the old quarry road, now overgrown with weeds and rusted signs warning danger, unstable ground. Holt's words echoed in her mind. Go where the wind smells like salt and iron. The sea smelled exactly like that, cold and metallic. She walked along the fence line until she saw it, a narrow footpath leading down toward the rocks, half hidden by wild grass. It wasn't on any of the old search maps. The soil was pale, limestone dust, the same kind of residue that had been found on the scooter handle 30 years ago. She followed the path slowly, the sound of waves growing louder with each step. At the base of the cliff, where the tide reached highest, the rocks formed a shallow alcove, almost a cave. The air there was still, heavy, something glinted faintly between the stones, a fragment of fabric, sun-bleached and frayed. Pink. Claire knelt down, her pulse hammering. She brushed the sand away, revealing a few small bones tangled in roots and cloth. Nearby lay the faint shape of rusted metal, the remains of a bracelet, or perhaps the buckle of a shoe that she didn't move for a long time. When she finally stood, the wind off the water hit her face hard enough to sting. Lila Morgan had been here all along, hidden by the sea, kept by the earth. Claire radioed for the forensics team, her voice steady but distant. As she waited, she looked back toward the cliffs, where the fog had begun to thin. For a moment, she imagined she could see a small figure at the top, a girl in a pink jacket, holding a silver scooter, waving once before fading into the light. Later, in the report, the discovery would be summarized in one short paragraph. Partial skeletal remains identified as Lila Morgan, located near the Bayridge cliffs. DNA confirmed match. Cause of death undetermined. The language was clinical, detached, but for Claire it meant the end of something that had haunted her for 30 years. It also meant that somewhere, in a quiet house on Elm Street, a mother could finally stop leaving the porch light on. When Evelyn Morgan received the call, she didn't cry. She simply closed her eyes and whispered, "Thank you for bringing her home." Outside, the evening sun broke through the clouds, casting the sea in gold. For the first time in 3 decades, Bayridge felt still, but in the evidence room of the police station, Claire left the notebook on her desk, open to the unfinished line. If it's sunny tomorrow. She looked out the window, and for the first time, the forecast promised clear skies. The news broke quietly, almost without sound. A single press release from the Bayridge Police Department, time-stamped 6:47 a.m., confirmed what the town had suspected since the night of the storm. Case 911124 officially closed. Suspect Raymond Holt. Status: deceased. Holt had been found dead in his prison cell only 2 weeks after his last meeting with Detective Claire Monroe. The report listed it as suicide, though some of the guards whispered that he had simply stopped breathing, as if something he'd kept buried had finally caught up to him in the dark. The evidence left behind, combined with the DNA confirmation from the cliffside, removed any remaining doubt. He had taken Lila Morgan's life. For most of Bayridge, it was just another story that had finally found its ending. But for the people who had lived with the silence, it was something else, a slow unburdening, heavy and fragile all at once. Evelyn Morgan sat by the kitchen window when the phone rang. The morning light filtered through the lace curtains, turning the dust motes into soft, drifting stars. She had aged quietly, silver hair pulled into a neat braid, thin hands resting on the table beside a half-finished cup of tea gone cold. When she answered, her voice was steady. "Mrs. Morgan, this is Detective Monroe." There was a pause, the kind that stretches between the living and the lost. "We found her," Claire said. Her tone was gentle, each word deliberate. "We're certain now. She was near the old quarry by the bay. We'll be bringing her home." Evelyn didn't speak for several seconds. Then, softly, almost to herself, she whispered, "I always told her not to take that path. The one near the cliffs." Her hand trembled slightly as she brushed a tear from her cheek. "The only one she would allow herself." "Thank you, Detective. You've done what no one else could." "It's what she deserved," Claire replied. There was a faint crackle on the line, the sound of Evelyn exhaling, slow and deep. "She's been gone for so long," the old woman said. "But it doesn't feel like she's coming back from somewhere far. It feels like she's been just outside the door this whole time, waiting." Claire didn't know how to answer, so she said nothing. Before they hung up, Evelyn whispered one more line, not to her, but to the empty air around her. "My girl's finally home." That afternoon, the sky above Bayridge was heavy with fog. From the cliffs, the ocean was barely visible, a restless grey sheet stretching into nothing. The wind carried the faint taste of salt and memory. A small service was held by the old lighthouse overlooking the sea. There was no crowd, no press, no ceremony, just a few townspeople, a priest, and a white wooden box no larger than a child's school. SATCHEL. Evelyn stood beside Claire, her coat buttoned to her throat, her eyes fixed on the horizon. The priest's words were quiet, nearly lost to the wind. When he finished, Evelyn stepped forward and placed a single pink ribbon atop the box. "She loved the ocean," she said softly. Said it sounded like someone breathing. Claire bowed her head. She was right. As the wind rose, the fog shifted, curling around the cliffs like pale smoke. Somewhere far below, the tide rolled in, carrying with it the hollow, rhythmic sound of waves against stone. It felt like the heartbeat of the world. When it was over, Evelyn turned to Claire. "Promise me something," she said. "Anything. Don't let her be forgotten. Not just her, all of them. The ones who never came home." Claire nodded. "I promise." Evelyn smiled faintly, a fragile, almost weightless thing. Then she turned and walked toward the road, her figure slowly dissolving into the mist. A few months later, the Bayridge Memorial for the Missing was completed. It stood on the bluff overlooking the sea, a semicircle of stone engraved with names, each one representing a child who had vanished in California between 1975 and 2000. At the center was a bronze statue, a girl on a scooter, head tilted as if listening to the wind. At the base, a plaque read, "For the ones who never came home and for those who never stopped waiting." The real scooter, Leela's scooter, had been carefully restored. The chrome shone again, the handle grips replaced, but the small dent on one side had been left untouched. A quiet reminder that perfection was never part of her story. Claire often came there in the early mornings. Before the town woke, she would stand near the statue, hands in her coat pockets, watching the fog rise from the bay. The mist always came first, soft, silver, swallowing the cliffs and the memorial until everything looked like it was floating. Sometimes, in that silence, she thought she could hear it again, the faint squeak of rubber wheels turning, the soft laugh of a child riding downhill toward the light. It was never loud, never clear, just enough to make her look up. In the police archives, the file remained, though now it bore a red stamp across the cover, closed. Inside were the photographs, the DNA report, the map of the cliffs, and the small blue notebook Claire had found in the evidence box. She had kept it all together, bound in a new folder. On the last page, she had added her own note in pen, located and identified, May 2021, return to family, case resolved. But beneath it, she had written something else, a line she hadn't been able to stop thinking about since that day by the sea. "If it's sunny tomorrow." She looked at it for a long moment, then closed the folder and placed it back on the shelf. Outside, Bayridge looked almost the same as it always had, the same narrow streets, the same faded signs, the same wind carrying the scent of the ocean. But there was something lighter in the air now, something unspoken and fragile, the quiet relief that comes when a town finally exhales after holding its breath for 3 decades. That evening, as the sun began to sink behind the cliffs, Claire parked her car by the overlook. The sea was calm, the sky painted in thin strokes of golden gray. She walked to the memorial, the crunch of gravel beneath her boots echoing softly. The statue gleamed in the fading light, its metal surface catching the last glint of day. She reached out and touched the scooter's handlebar, her fingers tracing the cold, smooth curve. "You're home now," she murmured. Behind her, the fog began to roll in again, curling around the memorial and the cliffs until sea and sky became one endless gray. Claire stayed until the mist swallowed everything, the statue, the horizon, the sound of the ocean, until there was nothing left but the faint whisper of wind and the steady rhythm of her own breath. When she finally turned to leave, the tide was already rising below. The sea kept its promise. It returned what it had taken, and somewhere, carried on the wind, the laughter of a child echoed faintly through the mist, a sound both heartbreaking and whole. Sometimes justice doesn't come from a lab. It comes from the hearts of those who refuse to forget. A case once buried under dust and silence was brought back to life, not by DNA alone, but by a mother's love, and by the memory of a little girl who never truly left Bayridge. What do you think keeps stories like this alive? Is it science, or something deeper that refuses to fade? Tell me your thoughts below. If this story moved you, please leave a like to help others discover it, and subscribe to SoulSpeak so you don't miss the next story where the past finally finds its voice again. Until then, keep listening, because sometimes, the quietest stories are the ones that speak the loudest.